I'm Christian Viveros-Fauné, and today I'm the face of America. All art is political no matter what. Whether you make abstract work that seems to have absolutely no connection to social justice or to the social fabric, or whether you make specifically declarative work that somehow or other hinges on, I don't know, white privilege or ideas of class or ideas of gender. In any environment, work is either political by commission or by omission. Perhaps in our lifetime, nor more so than in this time now. Christian Viveros-Fauné. I'm a writer and curator. I've been working in the visual arts field for about 30 years, mostly in New York, but I do a lot of international work. And I organize shows for museums and other places in New York and in Europe and Latin America, and I write books, stuff about art, stuff about culture. I was born in Santiago, Chile in 1965, and I've been raised between the States and Chile basically all of my life, sort of. I've been in New York really for almost the last 30 years. You know, once you make a decision to move and live in a place like New York, well, that gets compounded exponentially because, you know, one of the great things about this city, possibly the greatest thing about this city, is that you are elbow to elbow and cheek to cheek with people from all over and basically from just about every walk of life. I always say that, you know, New York has it hands down on the rest of the world in terms of cities because, you know, that great 40% of the population is not from, I don't know, North Carolina or North Dakota or Iowa. They weren't born outside of New York to be born in those places. They were actually born outside of the country. And that really makes it a very, very special place. Yeah, maybe Roberta Smith has some measure of power. Maybe Jerry Saltz has some measure of power because they continue to publish, well, one in the Times and the other one in New York Magazine. But those folks and those publishing purchases are few and far between. And I think there's a consensus out there, and there has been probably for the last decade, that art critics are about the most powerless people in the world, and you know, certainly in the ecology in which I move, the art ecology. That doesn't mean that certain people's opinions don't matter. I think mine does to some degree because people know me and I'm kind of a known quantity, and folks listen to what I have to say. Some folks listen to what I have to say. They think it's interesting or well put or entertaining or all of those things at once. So, you know, I don't know how that essentially sort of coalesces in terms of power dynamics. I choose to write and organize exhibitions because I think it's important to be able to put your money where your mouth is. That is, if you back up certain kinds of work, you have a right and maybe even an obligation to actually sort of try and get that work seen and get that work out there. So that's the way I choose to go about my own sort of activity. But as for an art critic like myself being powerful, not so much. I've been in the business of art. I used to have a gallery for about a decade, which was quite successful for a bit. I have been the director of art fairs. I like the business. I think the business is fundamental. I think money is fundamental. But I got into this because of certain intellectual ambitions. And so at some point I let the business side lapse or go elsewhere, or rather I went elsewhere and went back to what I liked doing the most, which was writing and thinking about art in terms of its history, but also in terms of its social usefulness. So that's sort of been the ride I've been on the longest, and the one that brings me the greatest sort of personal satisfaction. Having said that, I do want to underscore how important the business is. The business is a fundamental part of the ecology. And I do not believe in an ideal situation in which there is no business and there are ideas, or a situation in which there are ideas and there is no business. Both, and this may be a very American way to see things, are absolutely indissolubly linked, but they have been for eons and eons. Look, it was the project that I believed in, and Lucas Werner, who runs David's Werner Books, also believed in, and I'm very happy that we did it together. And essentially, it's a book of 50 great works of art, great political works of art, with 50 essays by me. They are not necessarily the greatest works of political art. I think they are. But they don't exhaust the idea of great works of political art. I start with Goya's Disasters of War and lead up to work from 2018, works of social practice, specifically Rick Lowe's Project Row Houses in Houston, and which I think is the last essay, if I remember correctly. But there are many other works that I could have included. I would submit that one of the places where people can look to images of truth, notions of truth, ideas of truth, is in past art that is of a political nature, like Goya and Delacroix, and present work that basically is put together in that vein. What I wanted to do with the book, with Social Forms, A Short History of Political Art, was to essentially provide a history of this happening. Political art has always been around. It's important to understand its role as historically placed. It didn't start yesterday. It didn't start at the Whitney Biennial. It started far before, and there are examples to which we can look for how to do this and how to do it properly, perhaps to do it better than we've been doing it since 2016. I often repeat this anecdote. Giorgio Morandi sat through 2 world wars in his little studio painting bottles and trinkets over and over again. Do the struggle of the wars, do the great tragedies of both of those periods in Europe and the rest of the world inhere in that work? Yeah, probably. Does it as much as Guernica? No, but it's there in a certain sense, almost by its absence, and by the concentration that you find in paying attention to those specific bottles, those figures, those bodies. That obsession speaks a lot to what else is missing from the what's present and what's missing in those pictures.